Right, hi Year 10. I want to talk through some impacts that humans are having on the environment. Okay, so we spent a lot of time looking at how other living things interact and impact on each other, but now we're going to think about humans and our impact on the environment. Okay, so there's lots of things that we do that has an impact on the environment. You've got a little picture there in terms of airplane travel, you've got factories, you've got quarries, you've got space being taken up, okay, for houses, for churches, for shops, all these different things. Okay, so there's lots and lots of different ways that we have an impact on the environment. Now, we have always had an impact on the environment, okay. However, the problem is that our population now is much, much bigger than it has been in the past. So I don't know how recent this statistic is, but the population of the world is about 6.6 billion people. 95 million babies are born every year. Okay, again, I'm not sure how up to date that statistic is, and that's 3 babies born every second. Okay, so we've got a huge population growth. Okay, we've got a massive, massive population of people that need all the things that we all take for granted and that will have those sorts of impacts. Okay, now some of the work that I gave you last week was looking at population growth. Okay, now I'm just going to go on to that first and then I'm come back and think about the reasons why. Okay, so in terms of human population growth, for a very, very long time, population of humans in the whole planet was quite small. Okay, and it was growing very, very slowly. Now, again, I'm not sure how accurate this data is, but for a considerable amount of time, the population was quite small and it was growing very, very slowly. Okay, different things have happened through history, which has caused increases in that growth. Okay, so for example, and I'll go back to the slide from before now, if it'll let me. The idea that we've got better healthcare, so people actually live longer than they have in the past. Okay, so we've got better healthcare, we've got hospitals, we can do operations. If you go back to sort of Victorian times, even then, people didn't live as long as we do now. Okay, their life expectancy might have been 50, 60, okay, now people live to sort of 80, 90 and beyond. Okay, so healthcare and vaccines particularly has prevented diseases, so that's had a huge impact on helping people survive and live, which is great, but it means that there's more people on the planet. Okay, we also had improvements in agriculture. Okay, so in the past, everyone sort of grew their own food. They might have had their own chickens, they might have had their own cow to get milk from, and that was really your priority. You spent most of your time being able to feed yourself. We didn't worry about going off on holiday or going to the cinema. People concentrated, their main role was to feed themselves and their family. Okay, with the development of machinery, that has meant that we can produce bigger quantities of food and we can harvest them much more quickly. So agriculture has resulted in much more plentiful food supply. Our water is much cleaner than it used to be. I'm sure in history you've done sort of different periods in time when you hear the horror stories of when people used to go to the toilet in a bucket and then they'd throw it out the windows, regardless of who was underneath them. So water wasn't always clean, and the sanitation. So the fact that our toilet waste and anything that you send down the sink goes off and is cleaned, and that we have clean water, has reduced diseases again, and then means that people survive. But it does mean that there's more people on the planet. Okay, so the more people there are, the bigger an impact that we are having. Okay, so like we said there, it was a slow growth for a very, very long time, but because of these different changes in food supply, in healthcare and medical care, the population of humans on the planet has grown dramatically. Now, obviously, this is an estimate of where it might be going. Now, you'll notice that as it goes up, it's sort of a very slopey S-shaped curve. Now, what they're suggesting is that we will reach a point where human population growth will actually level out. Okay, but we don't know that for definite. If all of a sudden we have another incredible technological advance that helps people to live even longer, so sort of robotic limbs, or they can grow new organs in a lab, or those kind of things, then it might cause that population growth to increase further. Okay. Also, if you've got things like a war, or like we've got at the moment with the COVID-19, that it's having a big impact on the population globally, it might cause that level to level off at a lower rate. Okay, so there's different things that can impact it. This is only a guess, but you can see there's been a very dramatic increase sort of from 1900 onwards. Okay, and that links to the impact that we're having on the environment. Okay, so the more people that you have on the earth, the more raw materials we need to make things such as minerals. We actually need more space to live on, and because we want things, we need to have quarries to make building materials. We have farms to grow our food. We have dumps to get rid of our waste. Okay, so it's all using space. We also use more energy, which is largely through burning fossil fuels. Okay, so the more demand we have for electricity, the more energy that we are using. Okay, so we've all got several devices now, whether you've got a phone and a tablet and a laptop and all these different things that you have at home that use electricity, your Game Boy and your PlayStation, all that kind of malarkey, they're all using energy. Okay, so the more people that have those, then the more demand there is for energy. And we also produce more waste and pollution. Okay, so in farming and having more food available, it means that we use a lot of chemicals to kill off the bugs that would have eaten it and the weeds that grow there. We all produce more sewage. Okay, we'll fertilizer again is used on the fields, so there's lots of toxic chemicals that we're using to try and improve our lives, but then it's causing a damage to the environment. And there's lots of gases that we produce. Okay, a lot of them through burning of fossil fuels. So a lot of these different ideas are linked together, okay, in terms of the impact that they have. Now I'm going to concentrate today on land pollution. Okay, so we've said already that humans need more space. The more humans there are, the more space we take up. But we can also add things to that land. So there's two different types of substance that we can basically just leave on the land. So the solid waste, things like plastic, metal, paper, other man-made materials. Now, some of those will rot down. So things like paper will actually biodegrade. They'll just disappear to nothing. They'll decompose. Things like plastic won't, okay, or at least they won't for a really, really long time, as we're often told in the news, okay. So these things are left on the surface of the planet and they're causing an impact, okay, on other organisms, but also they're starting to cause an impact back to us. Okay, and then the other sort of pollution is chemicals. So it could be herbicides. A herbicide is like a weed killer. Okay, a pesticide is something that would kill more sort of insect pests. They're used on our farms widely, okay, to make sure that the food grows and that we don't end up with lots being wasted. Crude oil, in getting it out of the ground to use for things like petrol and diesel, sometimes there's spillages. We also would have waste from industrial processes that actually gets dumped on the land, okay. So there's those two kind of categories of substance. The problem is that a lot of land pollution often also, when it rains, the rain falls through all the solid material and through all these chemicals, and then that water will leak into rivers, lakes, and then causes pollution of water sources. Okay, so land pollution, although it looks ugly and you might not think it looks nice, it also causes problems further down the line. Okay, so we've got billions of tons, not just lots, billions of tons of paper, plastic, synthetic materials, metal, wood being thrown away. And quite often we know that we all, rather than just putting it into a regular bin and then it goes in the rubbish, we wrap all of our things in plastic. Okay, so these bags might contain things that would decompose and biodegrade, but we've wrapped them in plastic. Okay, so that's going to take up more space. So it says there, on average, again, I'm not sure how up to date this statistic is, each household produces, and this is just in the UK, 1 tonne of rubbish every year. I would suggest that for a lot of people it's probably more than that. Okay, how could you estimate the amount of rubbish that you throw away each year? So if you think about the sampling that we did the other week, I wouldn't ask you to go and count the number of bin bags that everybody produces, okay, but what you could possibly do is take a sample, okay, so that you can estimate the amount of rubbish that people are throwing away. So for example, you wouldn't even necessarily have to go and count it yourselves. You could maybe do a survey of your street, okay, and ask all the people that live in your street how many bags of rubbish they throw away each week, okay, and then you could find out what area. So if you wanted to do Chorley, you'd say, right, okay, well, how many streets are there in Chorley? And then you'd work out an average of your street and you'd multiply it by the number of streets in Chorley, and you'd end up with an estimate, okay? So you'd have to then convert it from per week into each year, okay? So there's ways of doing it that doesn't involve you following the bin man and counting all the bin bags that he puts into it. Okay, so in terms of disposing of our waste material, there's different solutions. Now, landfill is the most straightforward, okay, but unfortunately, because of the volume of waste that we produce, they become full very, very quickly. And like I said before, as water and rain washes through them, it can contaminate the soil and the water around it, okay? And they don't look very nice, if I'm honest. They usually, once it's full, they do cover it over and try and make it into a park or something, but there's still lots of problems associated with landfill. Incinerating. This is basically they burn it, okay? So by burning it, you know yourself that if you have a bonfire in the garden or even a barbecue, you start off with a lot of material and at the end you're left with just ash, okay? So you reduce the amount of volume of waste that you have got. However, you are producing gases, some of which are toxic, some of which are going to potentially lead on to the greenhouse effect and global warming, okay? So there's some advantages, some disadvantages to incinerating as well. Recycling, okay, so recycling means that you can use those materials again. So we need less raw materials. It's not always perfect because sometimes recycling the materials actually uses a lot of energy, sometimes more energy than it would to actually make it from a fresh raw material. Okay, so recycling, it's all good in theory, but we need to sort of weigh up the pros and the cons of all these different methods, okay? Obviously with recycling, not everything can be recycled as well. Composting, so this time, if we think about things that will rot, then we can separate those, and rather than them going into any of the other solutions, we can potentially use them to decompose, okay? So they will rot away, so things like wood and paper and tissue and food and twigs and branches out of your garden and all that kind of thing, they will actually break down. But we can't use that for non-biodegradable waste, okay? So if you buy the little bags to put your food scraps in for composting, okay, the bag itself is made of a special type of plastic which will also decompose, okay? So you're not putting it in actual plastic bags, you're putting it into a biodegradable waste bag, okay? So there's lots and lots of advantages and disadvantages of each of these different methods. Now, different countries, hang on, just this bit first. The most effective way of having to deal with waste is to produce less of it, okay? So this is something that we need to be aware of and just try and be less throwaway. Now, again, it states there that 100 kilograms of resources makes 10 kilograms of shopping, okay? And most of those resources and most of that shopping will end up in the bin, okay? So if you think about your shopping, everything's wrapped in a plastic bag or a plastic cover, okay? That's used resources to make, it's used resources in the factory to have the power on and to work all that machinery to do it. A lot of our food gets brought in from overseas, so there's resources that are all being used up for everything that we have. You can't just look at a banana and say, oh right, yeah, it's just a banana. If it goes black and I throw it away, it doesn't matter because it's just a banana. It's used lots and lots of resources in being a banana and getting from where the banana was grown to your house, okay? So we need to think about designing products and how we actually go about to reduce the amount of waste that we produce. I know it's quite often in the news now about reducing the waste that we have, okay? There's lots more recycling centres. Most tips now, if you take anything to the tip, the local tip, they will be sorted. So there'll be people that work there that help you sort things into the right kind of skip so that it goes to the right place. Okay. Now, one of the problems is plastics, because I love putting my plastic in the recycling bin and thinking I'm doing a good thing, but not all of it can be. So we need to think about, or manufacturers need to think about, maybe having less types of plastic and more types of those that can be recycled or that are biodegradable. Okay, so we need to think about what it is that we're buying. Okay, so have a think about that. How could you reduce the amount of waste that you produce? I get really cross every time I go to the supermarket and I come home and unpack all my vegetables and I end up with virtually a carrier bag full of plastic to throw away. So how could we reduce that? This is what I was going to say about as well. Different countries have got different methods. Okay, so Greece and the UK are pretty bad at just sending things to landfill. Okay, we don't recycle that much, and we don't put very much into compost. If you think about some countries like Austria and Denmark, then they've got much smaller quantities that are being sent to landfill. Denmark has got a much higher incineration rate, okay, but on the good side they do have a lot more composting and recycling. Okay, so different countries have different priorities, I suppose, in terms of trying to reduce the impact from waste. Okay, so what you're going to do is I put a sheet on class charts for you to have a go at. If you can't print it out, you can do it on paper and send it to me, or send me a photograph. You can upload it to class charts, or you can send it me by email. Okay, and I'll put my email address on class charts too. Okay, I've lost my mouse. Why won't it work?